to look at the blue-white control deck list is there planar cleansing? The answer is no. Detention Sphere, yes, 4 of those. Win conditions, Joe's got 2 copies of Elspeth and an Aetherling. So taking a much more traditional approach here, being able to finish in time.
And Jeremy Hennessey is playing a junk mid-range deck, pretty similar to the one that we saw Reed Duke top 8 the Invitational with in Charlotte in Season 1. We saw Jeff Hoogland put up good results with this earlier on in the season as well. It's basically a board control deck. It accelerates with cards like Sylvan Caryatid. Course of Krufix, not technically acceleration, but just ways to generate more mana, and a lot of just individually impactful cards. You see threats like Reap of the Wilds, Obsidian, Archangel Thum, even an Alms Beast in Jeremy's list. So a lot of high impact cards, not necessarily the types of threats best suited to play beating blue-white control. These threats just kind of soft to cards like Dissolve, easy answers like Supreme Verdict and Sphinx's Revelation.
Lossett with just a couple of lands to begin. Same thing can be said here for Jeremy, except he does add a little mana acceleration to the board in Sylvan Caryatid. Lossett did scry his top card to the bottom. We'll play one of those white border islands that he's known for before passing the turn back over to Hennessey, and we'll see what Hennessey wants to ramp into here on his 3rd turn.
And Joe really just trying to make his 4th land drop here. From there, everything gets a lot easier. You see Jace in hand. I don't think there's a 4th land right now, so if he has Dissolve in hand, I think he's likely to dissolve literally any card that Jeremy plays here because the scry is so valuable.
That one's worth countering. Courser of Krufix going to bite the dust. Lossett taking a look at a Temple of Silence on top of his deck. Of course, he'd prefer if that land came into play untapped, so he could play Jace on turn 4, and he's actually going to put this card to the bottom, so maybe a greedy scry there by Joe.
I believe he has another Dissolve in hand, so he has another way to fend things off for now.
Lossett will draw a card. There's a copy of Sphinx's Revelation. Going to take a look at the Caryatid there. And actually, okay, it looks like he did have a land in his hand in the Godless Shrine, so he's going to go down to 18. Takes a look, make sure there's not a Mutavault hanging out over there, and there's not. And it looks like it is time to cast our first of what will likely be many Jaces this weekend.
And Joe immediately minusing, even though Jeremy has no board, doesn't want to risk this getting plucked off by just a hero's downfall. Joe also just wants to make his land drops from here, too.
You see a main deck negate will be revealed, as well as a Mutavault and a Temple of Silence. 2 lands are going to go to the grip. The counterspell will go to the bottom, and that will be Lossett's turn. Passes it back over to Hennessey. See if Hennessey can resolve something big here while the shields are down.
And you saw Jeremy just draw a Doomblade for the turn here. That's part of the problem that he has in this matchup. 3 main deck copies of Doomblade, 4 copies of Hero's Downfall. Those aren't dead against blue-white control, but not the most efficient cards. And 3 Abrupt Decay, same deal. Not a dead card, but not terribly efficient. All these removal spells may prevent Jeremy from getting much action going onto the board, and he's very susceptible to losing to just a big Sphinx's Revelation from Joe because he won't be under much pressure to do anything.
Hennessey going to play a land after revealing the top card. Did play a Temple Garden and play tap. Top card you do see there is Advent of the Worm. And as good as that card is, Courser kind of giving that away will make things a little bit easier here for Lossett, as he'll take up Jace to 3 and simply pass the turn back.
I like that take up a lot from Joe there. He can squeeze more value out of this Jace. Also, plussing Jace allows his Mutavault to effectively block the Courser of Krufix. So, find some time here.
Advent of the Worm is added to the grip. Temple of Silence is the top card from the Courser, so that looks like that's going to come into play, and it does. So Hennessey will trigger that, gain a little bit of life here. And we'll see what the scry is going to be. You see a copy of Hero's Downfall. I mean, decent in this situation, but you can't be too thrilled with that reveal. Sure, it can take care of Jace, but at what cost?
This is kind of the systemic problem with the matchup that Jeremy has at least game 1. Too many of his cards are reactive, don't apply enough pressure, even though they have targets in Joe's deck. He has to win the game before Sphinx's Revelation becomes a factor. And that can't happen when you're drawing a bunch of Heroes, Downfalls, and Abrupt Decays, even though those have targets in Joe's deck.
Hennessey going to make an attack here. Lossett says, I'm going to cast a Celestial Flare. I'd like to get that off the table if you don't mind. Still being able to leave up the shields of a Dissolve if he does have one. So the Courser will bite the dust. You see Hero's Downfall get turned over. Hennessey opting to leave that on top as an answer to Jace. Looks like he may have another copy of Hero's Downfall in his hand right now as well. So we'll see what Hennessey is up to and what his plan is. It looks like the plan right now is just to cast an Advent of the Worm on Lossett's turn, which is a pretty good plan.
Although, he really needs this to resolve because the rest of his hand doesn't do anything. It's a bunch of removal spells.
See Lossett there with the Temple of Silence that we already knew about. He's going to take Jace down, look for a little bit of an advantage, show a Temple of Enlightenment, a Detention Sphere, and another copy of Jace. So a pretty good 3 cards revealed there for Lossett. If you're Hennessey, the information that you want to take in right now is, I see a Detention Sphere, that means my opponent does not have Planar Cleansing.
It's most likely the case there.
The split will be Sphere versus, so Hennessey a little scared of the Oblivion Ring style effect. Lossett with the option of taking 2 cards. Pretty hard to pass up those 2, I think.
this feels like the first pile that we saw, which was negate in 2 lands, where Joe would take probably any of the 2 card piles, the ways they could be divided here. Although Joe may value the Jace pretty lowly in these 3 cards, because the Jace in play, it sort of seems like he's going to be able to keep that going for as long as he wants to.
Sphere going to go to the bottom. Lossett, we know he has a Revelation in the hand. He's going to start by playing this Temple now. So there's a Temple of Enlightenment. That card looks like it's going to go to the bottom very quickly, not what Lossett is looking for. And looks like he may have 7 cards in his hand and ready to kick it back over to Hennessey, saying, do your worst. And this is the worst that he can do, which is an Advent of the Worm. Lossett quickly goes through his hand here. See if he has an answer for this card. Azorius Charm is something that can certainly get the job done. Dissolve as well. How much does he actually care about this 5/5 at the end of turn?
Now that he has a backup Jace in his hand, I think he's unlikely to fight over this, because he can just let this Advent resolve. He can comfortably afford to take 5 or lose the Jace now with the backup Jace in hand, and then sweep up everything with the Supreme Verdict in his hand, leave up Dissolve the whole time. This seems like a much safer route.
Advent of the Worm, a criminally underplayed card, it feels, given its power level. Card that can't be hit, of course, by Lifebane Zombie, but doesn't interact very well with Domri. So there are some pluses and some minuses to that card.
But the efficiency is through the roof.
Yes, of course.
4 cost, instant speed, 5/5 trampler. Yeah, it's not great against every single card, or it synergizes with every single card, but you can't beat that rate.
So the Worm token is ready to attack, and we'll see exactly where it's going. And it looks like it's going straight to Lossett's life total. No interest in taking care of Jace. Jace, of course, being on 1, not the most threatening play in the world.
Maybe Jeremy takes care of it next turn with his Worm if Joe pluses, but Joe can, again, comfortably afford to take the 5 points here, and probably not worth killing the Jace against dealing 5 to Joe.
Hennessey going to follow up with another copy of Sylvan Caryatid. And we again know he has that Doomblade in his hand, but not a lot of action. Hero's Downfall there as well, but not putting a ton of pressure on the board there, as Lossett is going to tick up his Jace, drew a Mutavault for the turn. Feels like maybe we're on the way for a Revelation turn.
Well, I think that this turn, maybe Supreme Verdict, hold up Dissolve, and that allows him to Revelate the next turn, probably end the game.
Not a bad sequence of events. If there is a Verdict hanging out there, it could just be a Detention Sphere as well here to take care of that Worm token. It's pretty much all the same.
Yeah. It's good to cast in your Detention Sphere against the Advent token, because Jeremy's list likely has Abrupt Decay, maybe some Golgari Charms in the main deck. So anytime you get to use a Detention Sphere to take care of a token, which doesn't come back if the Detention Sphere gets blown up, that's pretty good value. It's a little bit safer.
Temple of Silence, going to scry the top card to the bottom. Immediately there for Lossett. Doing a nice job of hitting his land drops, using his Jace. He says, I've done everything I want to do this turn. Able to leave up Dissolve if he has one. I think that might complete here for Lossett. You see the Revelation there as well. Here is a Hero's Downfall. We're going to fire that off at the Jace. And that will take care of that. Lossett doesn't seem to mind. He does have a backup Jace in his hand after all.
And tons of access to card advantage as well with the Swings Revelation. So that's not a bad exchange for Jeremy, but that's not going to get him the type of progress he needs to really threaten Joe in any meaningful way.
Blood Baron of Escopa you see there in Hennessey's hand. Drew a Hero's Downfall for the turn. There's also a Doomblade hanging out, but this is just part of the problem that you mentioned. There's too many cards here in game number 1 here for Hennessey that just aren't high enough impact against blue-white.
He gets to clean it up a little bit post-board, but there are a lot of removal spells in his deck. And if you were expecting a metagame of, a lot of boss slide decks, I could see building a deck like the one that Jeremy's done.
Absolutely.
Got a lot of good blockers, good spot removal spells. A card like Alms Beast is about as well suited to beat 2/2s and pump spells as you can really get, but against Joe's list, those cards not very good.
Hennessey a little afraid to cast that Blood Baron, opting to pick a better spot. As Lossett will draw a card for the turn. You see him pull Jace forward. Might have some interest in deploying the Planeswalker yet again here, maybe ticking down for a divination style effect. You see him reorganizing the mana here as well. Lossett with a lot of experience, of course, playing these blue-white-esque control decks, more in Legacy when he does play Miracles, but he's gravitated towards these in Standard. His Invitational top 8 in Season 1, he actually played Burn, which is a deck I don't think many people expected him to play, and he himself didn't expect to do very well with it, but was able to cobble together enough wins to make the top 8.
Joe definitely has most of his reps, of course, at this point with the type of decks you alluded to, but at least in Standard, he mixes it up a bit.
See Temple of Enlightenment, an Island, and an Azorius Charm. The reveal here. Hennessey will split those up. Oddly enough as well, we think of Joe, of course, as that expert Legacy player. He has more Standard open wins than Legacy open wins.
It's a weird stigma about Joe. I mean, part of it is kind of, a little bit. He streams a lot of Legacy. He's known in that community for doing that, but he has quite the standard resume as well.
So we'll see what the split will be here for Hennessey of these 3 cards from the set. Looks like it may be just Azorius Charm versus, and that's exactly what it will be. So we'll see if Lossett has interest in lands or the spell. He will go with the spell. Plenty of lands in play. He's got a couple more in his hand, so not going to be missing any land drops anytime soon.
And he's at risk of discarding to hand size, too.
Yeah,
so
that's a very real thing at this point. See the Goblet Shrine there for Lossett, another Mutavault. Lossett going to play a Goblet Shrine and simply pass the turn back. Again, representing Dissolve, something he's been doing over the past couple of turns.
It's a big insurance policy. He knows he has the tools in his hand to beat Jeremy whenever, as long as nothing weird slips through the cracks. So just leave up the Dissolve. Eventually he'll rev and have enough leftovers to threaten Jeremy with Dissolve backup and take the game from there.
Downfall does take care of that Jace. And all Hennessey will do is simply pass the turn back over to Lossett. Lossett will take a draw. It's a copy of Elspeth, Sun's Champion. You have to imagine, if you're Joe, 2 heroes Downfall down, got to be good to go here.
And if he makes a land drop here, he has enough mana left over to protect it or himself with his copy of Dissolve. And so, pretty good sequence. Jeremy here sitting on this Blood Baron. Now, I understand he's got to be pretty certain that Joe has Supreme Verdict, and so it's not great to cast, but I just I don't think it's getting any better for you.
Yeah, I don't like the situation here of just simply waiting. You know, you have to, I think, in this situation, just hope for the best that your opponent just doesn't have what they're looking for.
The question is, waiting for what?
Yeah.
What is the thing you're waiting for?
You know, if you're trying to push it through a Dissolve, or push it through a Dissolve via Thoughtseize or something, it's really not going to get the job done, in my opinion. I think I think much earlier in the game, if I was Jeremy in his situation, I cast the Blood Baron. Do I think it's going to win me the game? Probably not, but I have to at least give myself the best chance to win the game.
I totally respect Jeremy's play if he had something in play that was attacking. Anything at all. And then sure, yeah, leave the Blood Baron in the chamber in case you draw a Thoughtseize, you can push it through, or Joe taps out, you can land your Blood Baron, that's fine, but like this, you just gotta cast it and cross your fingers.
Doing nothing plays right in the hands of blue-white control. And now it's a little bit late to the party. Blood Baron's going to show up, and sure, I mean, Joe now has the option to let this resolve because he has an answer to it on the table in Elspeth.
Yeah, plus he's had numerous additional draw steps to try to find Supreme Verdict as well. So this Blood Baron may have been threatening a few turns ago. Now the ship has sailed.
On the way, it looks like Blood Baron of Scopa will resolve due to Lossett having the answers necessary in the hand. We'll see if Hennessey has anything else to play this turn. Again, he's had that Doomblade in his hand for a while, but this is not the matchup for that card, as Lossett will untap and take a draw here. It's a copy of Hallowed Fountain. You see the Azorius Charm. Looks like there may be a Detention Sphere hanging out there. Elspeth going to take down and take care of the Blood Baron of Vescopa. See if Lossett has anything else he wants to do this turn. Attacking is fine. It'll get him a point of damage through.
Well, he has Mutavaults as well that he can fire up.
This is true.
It just depends if he wants this to be the turn where he revelates or if he wants to trade more resources before revelating. I can see an argument, just make your land drops and attack him, and eventually the revelation will bury him. And in the meantime, you can threaten his life total. Still hold up Dissolve.
Yeah. We're coming across for 3.
Yeah, it looks like Joe's doing a revelate this turn, most likely, which is fine. But
yeah, this feels like the game-ending revelation, where your opponent looks at how many cards you have in your hand, and they just say, "All right, that's enough for me."
Could Joe have gone beatdowns and maybe revelated for 10 instead of 7? Yeah, maybe.
Yep.
But revelating for 7 is probably going to be good enough here.
Yeah, I agree. Hennessey going to play an Elspeth of his own. Wouldn't be surprised if it actually buys out the counterspell here from the set that he's been holding on to for some time.
Yeah, it's unlikely that Jeremy produces a card better than Elspeth, so.
Little scry here. Lossett going to actually leave Syncopate on top. That's basically a hard counter at this point.
Against anything that would actually be threatening. You know,
yeah.
Jeremy's showing a lot of 5 and 6 mana spells. Some of them may matter, you know. I'm sure Joe doesn't want something like Obsidian or Blood Banner or another Elspeth slipping through, and Syncopate lines up just fine against those cards.
Set at the ready. It looks like we're taking a mood lighting approach.
I believe this has happened in Las Vegas before.
I think you're right. A little mood lighting here.
This is an Alexis Park suite tradition right here.
This is a specialty.
This is
that
a specialty.
we have. as we do interrupt the game here. We'll be back underway in just a moment. See everyone waiting patiently here. Make sure you do keep your belongings.
Yeah.
In a situation like this.
You will get a time extension, don't worry guys.
There will of course be a time extension announced here for the players, but it looks like someone accidentally bumped the light switch here in the Lexus Park Hotel. These things do happen.
And seemingly here more often than anywhere else.
Yes. Seems like almost every time we come.
Yeah.
But hey, I'm a fan of tradition.
Yeah.
I think tradition is a good thing.
It's important. Continuity.
Yeah, whatever that big word means. Here's the Sphinx's Revelation. It's going to be for 4.
Yeah. And Joe could have waited, maybe try to grip some more cards, but 4 cards with Jeremy not really doing anything, and you have an Elspeth in play, probably good enough to win. And Joe may want to free up his mana to, leave up Syncopate and start threatening with Mutavaults, for example.
Also, you see his hand size here. Maybe he just has no interest in discarding hand size. If he was to rev for 7, for example,
yeah,
would have to figure some things out as he does attack here for 3. Yet again, and Caryatids are going to get in front of each token. I think Joe knows that he's going to be taking 1 here. So just looking to close it out at this point. As Elspeth's going to take up, 3 more soldiers are going to come into play. Now, the fun thing here is, we saw Reed do top 8 the Invitational last weekend with no Elspeths, no Aetherling. Which direction would you go? Do you prefer the win condition approach, or do you prefer the grind you out into a pulp and I'll kill you with Jace at Elixir approach that Duke took last weekend?
I think that I would still play Elspeth if for no other reason than concerns over time. That would be my big incentive to want to do that. Even if you thought they were equal in terms of what's the better win condition, I would err towards the one that allowed me to kill my opponent twice in 50 minutes. And it's very hard to do that with the Elixir build.
Yeah, it's a little bit scary to me, especially if you're Reed, or if you're playing that version of the deck that doesn't have Elspeth Aetherling any way to kill the opponent. My fear, of course, is losing game 1.
Yeah.
And then you have to really accelerate your pace of play to be able to win game 2 and game 3, but you don't really have a great way to do that either. So Joe with a main deck Null.
Whoa! How many of those are in there?
Just 1. Pretty good against the old Underworld Connections. That was just cast there by Hennessey. Hennessey going to play a copy of Overgrown Tomb Tap before passing the turn back. Null's actually got some utility in this format. Of course, there are a lot of creatures that happen to be creature enchantments.
Yeah, that's the big one. I mean, all the Corsair, Crewfix, Master of Feast type creatures all get caught up in that.
Yeah.
A lot of the cards that you care about, especially Underworld Connections, get snagged by it.
The second to come in here with 6 soldier tokens. 2 of them will get blocked. So 4 damage will come through for Hennessey.
And what I really like about a Null is I don't think any deck respects the possibility of blue-white control having anything to do for 1 mana. I know when I'm playing against it, I consider that to be shields down. I can do whatever I want. So having a 1 mana piece of interaction is really valuable for that deck.
I think the only thing people think of is Dispel at that point.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't counter everything, of course, and a Null is something that can really catch someone by surprise. As here's a Hero's Downfall, number 3 from Hennessey. You have to imagine this is targeting Elspeth, and we'll see if Lossett does have a counterspell to fight over this, or even if he even cares at this point. It looks like he does have multiple copies of Syncopate in the grip, but he says that's fine. My Elspeth is down, and between my soldier tokens, all 9 of them in play, and the Mutavaults, chances are I'll be able to get the job done, as here's another copy of Sylvan Caryatid.
Probably doesn't need tokens 10 through 12 to get this one done.
You don't think so?
I think he can do it with just the 9.
Lossett going to draw a card here, serve in for 9 points of damage. 3 of those will get blocked, so 6 will come through. Hennessey will take a little more damage. I guess you can let your Elspeth die when you have a backup one.
That's another thing, too.
And here is the second copy of the Sun's Champion. Up to 5 that elevator goes. 3 more soldier tokens going to come into play here for Lossett. And going to just simply pass the turn back. Hennessey essentially into the hard lock here. No really getting out of the situation for him, I believe.
No way.
I think he's going to get to see 1, maybe 2 more cards before we do prepare ourselves for a second game of Magic here. And as Nick Miller told us in the sideboard a little bit earlier this weekend, a lot of blue-white control here this weekend.
A lot of the popular players. I mean, there's some players like Tannin Grace, for example. Joe a little bit, who regularly play blue-white control decks. But I still feel like the room is going to be flush with it. There are some tools that the deck has to fight Tom's list, particularly Ratchet Bomb and Fiendslayer Paladin. And if people are trying to gravitate towards board control decks to fight Tom's deck, then blue-white control with a good sideboard to beat Tom's deck could be an excellent metagame call.
Just a passing the turn back here from Hennessey. I think Lossett is going to go reach and untap some mana here in just a moment. Looks like there might be a little confusion that's being cleared up here as Lossett will draw a card, play an island, fire up these Mutavaults here. And assuming that we do block the biggest creatures, this will be enough damage to get the job done. Joe Lossett's going to win game number 1 here over Jeremy Hennessey. Blue-Eye Control up a game over Junk mid-range.
A lengthy affair, but Joe played pretty fast. Now, that said, he rarely was had to mull over too difficult of a decision, but he was at least able to win game 1 pretty quickly.
It's time to go to the sideboards here. You've got Junk mid-range in front of you. What does Jeremy Hennessey have access to?
An Lossett, Ghost Council, a Gaze of Granite, 2 Sin Collector, 2 Bioblade, 3 Mistcutter Hydra, a Lifebane Zombie, 2 Banishing Light, a Whip of Erebos, and a Thoughtseize. The big thing here is just getting out some of these removal spells. The 3 copies of Doomblade absolutely have to go, and I don't think you want 3 Abrupt Decay and 4 Heroes Downfall and 4 Sylvan Caryatid. The deck needs to be just disruption and pressure. So I think he's going to want the 2 Sin Collectors, the 3 Mistcutter Hydras, the Lifebane Zombie, and the additional Thoughtseize and the Obsidian, and just remove some mixture of removal spells and mana.
On Lossett's side here, oftentimes see him sideboarding in creatures. I know watching him at the Invitational last weekend, he was a big fan of Archangel of Thune. He's got 3 of those again this weekend. A Pithing Needle, 2 copies of Dispel, 3 copies of Blind Obedience, 4 Nightfall Specters, and 2 copies of Deicide. I imagine he likes Deicide in this matchup. We did see Courser as well as Underworld Connections. So that's a pretty easy step to take, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him board into Archangel of Thune, maybe assuming his opponent's going to board out most of the removal. Abrupt Decay, well, Abrupt Decay will stay, but it doesn't take care of Archangel, of course. Doomblade will probably bite the dust, and Hero's Downfall will stay, but you can actually overload those effects.
Well, in this matchup, I think that Jeremy actually has the potential to just outpower Archangel. I mean, He has a bunch of his own very threatening 5 and 6 mana threats. He has his own copies of Elspeth, which if Joe pumps the Archangel once, Elspeth then answers. So if I was Joe, I would just want to stay on the game 1 control plan because I think that's really solid against Jeremy. He's likely to get better at fighting against Joe's deck. You just have to imagine there's Thoughtseizes and Duresses, and he can cut some of the creature removal spells and so on and so forth. But I think that Archangel is playing a little bit into Jeremy's hands. I would just want to stay as lean of a control deck as possible. I do like the Deicides, though, for sure.
Yeah, I think those are auto-includes at this point.
Now, what's interesting to me is Blind Obedience, not really suited for this matchup necessarily, but I have seen blue-white control players that basically bring in against every green opponent because Mistcutter Hydra is so threatening. So I'm curious to see if Joe wants to bring that card in, even though it's not very good against the rest of Jeremy's deck, because Mistcutter Hydra is a singularly threatening card that Joe needs to take some measures to mitigate.
Well, as these players do sideboard and finish shuffling up, we had some large announcements last weekend at our Season 2 Invitational. We'll go over one of them right now. Modern Premier IQs beginning in Baltimore. Pretty exciting.
This is great. Stores get to run these as well, but we're going to be hosting these at the Open Series, as you mentioned, starting in Baltimore every Sunday alongside the Legacy Open. $5,000 in cash prizes, open points to all participants. Top 4 receive invitations to an invitational, side events prizes, the whole shebang. We wanted to start running large modern events at our opens. The feedback we most regularly hear is we want more modern events, but we didn't want that to come at the expense of standard or legacy. So we're adding a modern Premier IQ to every open series starting in Baltimore. So if you're a modern fan, if you just don't have the collection for legacy, we're offering you an additional tournament to play in on Sundays, and we hope that this is a big boon to the modern enthusiasts all around the country.
You do see the schedule there. Standard Open will, of course, start at the same time as usual on Saturday, beginning at our Baltimore Open, but we'll only be doing the Swiss rounds on day number 1, and then on Sunday we'll start the top 8 at 8 a.m. The Legacy Open will be pushed an hour back, a little hour earlier to 9 a.m., and then Modern Premier IQ will begin at 10 a.m. So on Sunday, as much Magic as you can handle realistically.
Yeah, we wanted to reshuffle the deck a little bit. The Standard Opens were running a little bit late because we were playing the quarterfinals on Saturdays. This was causing issues for some of the staff, players, and so forth. So we just wanted to roll the entire elimination rounds onto Sunday, but otherwise our Open Series are the same thing, except, of course, the exciting announcement, which is the Modern Premier IQs. And again, stores can apply for this feature as well. This is not only Star City Games that's going to be hosting these. The same way that TOs and stores can apply for IQs now, you can apply for these Premier IQs as well. And you can see we already have some stores slotted to play. Learn to Play in Tampa, Florida, Uncle's Games in Tacoma, Washington, CM Games in Knoxville, Enchanted Grounds in Denver, and Legion Games in Roseville. So we already have some of these modern Premier IQs ready to go on the local level. Stores and TOs, if you're interested in running these, you can apply for these the same way that you apply for all the other IQs IQs. And if you're a player interested in these things, of course, talk to your store owner, talk to your TO, and get these into your store.
The big thing here is you guys give us feedback, and trust me, we're listening.
Of course. We want to do Modern for a long time, don't get me wrong. Even before Richmond, and certainly after Richmond, with the attendance that we saw there and the enthusiasm for the format, we wanted to run those events. But trying to figure out a way to do it that didn't come at the expense of Standard or Legacy just took us a little time to work out the details. But they're here, again, starting in the Baltimore Open in July and through the rest of the 2014 season at the minimum, we're going to start having these Modern IQs on Sunday.
I'm excited. We hope you guys are too, as we're going to watch game number 2 here between Jeremy Hennessey and Joe Lossett. Junk mid-range versus blue-white control. Hennessey did lose game number 1. Everything did go exactly how Lossett wanted. We'll see if things do go that way again here for game number 2. Hennessey will be on the play, taking a look at the opening hand. Looks like he may be happy. But maybe considering some things here as well. He's going to keep. Lossett will as well. And game number 2 underway with an overgrown tomb into play tapped.
I like the one Alms piece in Jeremy's list. I think this has been an underplayed card in Standard. Very solid against just any sort of little creature deck, and lines up pretty nicely against Jund monsters as well. It's bigger than their stuff. You can't abrupt decay it. So there's only one copy, not necessarily a superstar in his list, but I do believe this is a card that's been underplayed in Standard.
Lossett firing away with some temples here. Tempo of Enlightenment to begin, Tempo of Silence to follow up. You see Hennessey with just a couple copies of Overgrown Tomb. Does have the other color of mana necessary. There's the Plains. Time to follow this up with maybe an Underworld Connections, potentially a Courser, and it will be a Courser of Crufix. The second to take a look at that, and you do see a copy of Archangel of Thune in his hand. Again, I'm not too surprised. I'm not going to say the decision is right or wrong, but I'm not too surprised to see that in his deck after sideboard. He's been a big fan of shifting into creatures after board.
And maybe part of that is time and assuming that the opponent just doesn't have the resistance to fight you games 2 and 3, because most of their creature removal will be in the sideboard. It's a little bit different in Jeremy's case because he has Hero's Downfall. Maybe he doesn't keep in all 4, but he probably keeps in at least 2. So your Archangel's not necessarily safe like it is against other decks, but still.
4 mana looks to be tapped here. Looks like Hennessey's going to slow down. I think he's maybe a little ahead of himself. He's going to start by attacking here for 2. You see the Obzad on top of Hennessey's deck. That's a scary threat. The follow-up's pretty scary as well. Reaper of the Wilds.
Jeremy trying to get out on the board here. He does have Underworld Connections in his hand. Had chosen to deploy it on turn 3, trying to get a little more aggressive.
Is that looking at a Syncopate here? Makes you wonder if he's looking at maybe a copy of Supreme Verdict, but the answer looks like no. So he's going to Syncopate this. The big question is, does he have an answer that Obzad that's on top of the deck, and does Hennessey have the 5th land? This is a scary situation here if you're Lossett.
Obzad's a really threatening card against blue-white control. Once he gets into play, it's pretty hard to answer.
Yeah, some versions do sideboard Renounce the Guilds to get that, or Blood Baron off of the table, but looking at Lossett's 75, that card is not here this weekend. Looks like Lossett's going to go with the Detention Sphere to take care of the Courser, so going to slow things down as Hennessey does draw that copy of Obzad for the turn. Lossett hoping that doesn't come into play. We'll see if Hennessey does have the 5th land, and it looks like he does in the form of Temple Garden. So the question is, will he pull the trigger?
This seems like a great spot to land Obzad. I mean, when you have Mistcutter Hydra in your hand, you pretty much want to play all your other threats while your opponent is tapped out, and then when your opponent has Counterspell mana up, that's when you want to play Mistcutter Hydra.
And there is the Ghost Council. It'll come in, a little drain and a little brain, and now it's going to go hiding. So Lossett draws a copy of Sphinx's Revelation, but does not have, 1, a 5th land, or 2, the 2nd blue land to cast it. So back comes in Obzad. Hennessey's going to gain little, Lossett's going to take a little. And this is a great spot to be in if you're Hennessey.
And this is an awesome spot to land Mistcutter Hydra 2, as Joe does have Counterspell mana up. Jeremy may need to deploy a 2nd creature this turn. I know he's a little bit worried about the possibility of Supreme Verdict that Joe can't, or actually can currently cast, but could potentially be representing here. But because Joe played Celestial Flare last game, I think you just need to play a 2nd attacker. You can't just have your Obzad get killed and then your turn be, all right, cast Underworld Connection, say go, or whatever.
Celestial Flare is going to get cast here. Gets to take down one of these bad boys, but they're both bad news here for Lossett. You have to imagine Hennessey's going to sacrifice the Mistcutter just because Obzad's just such a better threat.
It attacks for more damage and is immune to Supreme Verdict. Yeah. They seem like 2 compelling cases.
So there goes the 4/4 Mistcutter Hydra. That's going to come across here for 5, and it's going to go hiding yet again here for Hennessey. In the driver's seat this game, Lossett's going to take a draw here. He missed his 5th land drop last turn. Looks like he's going to miss it again. Draws a copy of Jace Architect of Thought, a copy he can't even cast.
Yeah, a lot of temples in Joe's list. And without double blue right now, you ask yourself, why does a list like Joe still play something like a copy of Azorius Guildgate? It's because he needs to have double blue and double white on turn 4.
Yeah, this is certainly the reason. Hennessey does bring Obzad back in. This will be a thought, sees to clear the way, and Lossett says, no, thank you. So Jeremy Hennessey is going to win game number 2 very quickly against Joe Lossett. Junk mid-range, ties it up against blue-white control.
A little bit of a leaner list here from Jeremy in the post-board games. Mistcutter Hydra was a significant threat as well. So, the junk mid-range list is paying a lot of cost in game 1 against the control matchups, but shorts it up a little bit post-board, mostly because it just gets to get cards like Doomblade out of the list.
Both players going to shuffle up here for game number 3, but while we wait, we will talk about the other thing we talked about last weekend, SCG game nights, every Wednesday coming in September. A lot of fun to be had.
Yeah, this is pretty exciting stuff. Every Wednesday night, we will be giving out these prize kits. They'll come with 2 pins and 8 foil tokens each week. We'll have new pins and foils each month. Star City Games organized play is very focused on competitive level play. We have the open series, the IQs, and so forth. We wanted to give something a little more casual, a little more grassroots, and so you have it here. Stores, you can run this whatever format you want to. This can be another draft, another standard tournament, even more casual, non-sanctioned format like Commander or Two-Headed Giant. So stores, again, you can manage all these resources, apply for this the same way that you apply for everything else through Star City Games organized play. Players, if you want this, again, go talk to your store owner or your tournament organizer, get this up and running.
It's not hard to set up. You can bug them to death to get it, and it will be a lot of fun coming in September for you guys. SCG game night. It looks like these players are just about ready to do battle here for Lossett. Got to find those lands and preferably some blue mana.
Yeah, though Jeremy is bringing a much better deck to the table post-board than he was game 1.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, too.
Much more threatening things he's doing here this go-around.
Sin Collector 2 is an excellent card. We didn't see it in that game. He's got 2 copies.
An absolutely fantastic card in the matchup.
Yeah.
One of the scariest cards I think blue-white can play against. So of course, a card like Blood Baron and Obstinate, those are scary cards, but they're also expensive. Sin Collector fits a nice role being 3 mana and having a huge effect on the game and forcing action right away.
Duresses and Thoughtseizes are powerful against blue-white, and the deck is in the market for more pressure. Sin Collector is also pretty potent because you can play it on 3, take something, and then if your opponent plays Jason minuses, your Sin Collector could just wipe it up. So there's a lot to like about the card. It's surprising to me how little main deck play it sees because nearly every deck has some targets in it, though I guess it's just poor enough against decks like Jund Monsters that you can't really afford to play a bunch of copies in the main. But one of the better sideboard cards that black-white decks have access to against decks like blue-white and Esper.
Both players going to continue shuffling here. We'll be underway in game number 3. If you are just joining us, we do appreciate it. StarCityGames.com Open Series here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Cedric Phillips, Patrick Sullivan bringing you all the coverage this weekend long. At SCG Live, hashtag SCGVEGAS for your tweets all weekend as we are in round number 1 of 10. Watching Joe Lossett among 441 players total here this weekend, doing battle number 3 on our Season 3 leaderboard. Season 1 and Season 2, it's crazy to say, they're done.
So fast. It all happens so fast.
It really does. We're going to look up. We're going to be at the Players' Championship.
I know.
That's crazy to think about.
It's all flown by.
Last weekend, Season 2 Invitational, of course, won by Tom the Boss Ross. Really, I've watched some top 8s in my day, but oh boy, was that a beating.
I think that I had to go back to Reed Duke's win in Los Angeles to think of a, more defining, more signature invitational win in that one.
Yeah. It felt like it was just Tom's to lose, and he was not losing it. It was just dominating, impressive fashion by the boss. That's why he's headed to the Players' Championship. As we do take a look here at a Temple of Deceit to begin game number 3. Looks like going to put the top card to the bottom. We're underway in this final game. See who's going to get out of this match with a win. Temple of Malady there for Hennessey. Going to leave his top card on top. Back to Lossett we go. You have to assume Joe will have a second land here. Just curious to see what it's going to be. It looks like a Temple of Silence. So a little more scry action here. Gotta love those temples.
They're so potent in lists like this. I mean, they're in the market for land drops anyway. They want to be adding more lands. They're just really powerful in any game that isn't blisteringly fast.
Maybe it's time for a Sylvan Carry added, and it is for Hennessey. Going to pass the turn back over to Lossett, who will take a draw here. Remember, he kept his top card on top. Looks like it's a Jace. This is an island. Lossett will pass the turn back. Does have a Syncopate at the ready to counter something. But as you mentioned, Hennessey's deck gets a lot more difficult after sideboard.
Just has more meaningful cards and less dead draws.
3 mana. This is a Courser of Crufix. See if Lossett has any interest in letting this resolve. We saw it annul from Joe in game number 1. Don't know if he has one here or not.
Appears that he has Deicide in his hand.
Not so bad. not so bad at all. That is going to resolve. Give Lossett a little bit of information here, as there's a Temple Guard that's going to come into play tapped. Hennessey will gain a life and go up to 21. And we'll see if Joe wants to fire off the DSI to get this thing off the table.
With Jace in hand, it seems like a good spot to do this because Joe will likely want to play Jace and minus it. So a 2-power creature is not something he wants to leave in play.
DSI will take care of that courser. Both players making sure to know exactly where that does go. Of course, at Sylvan Caryatid, we'll get turned face down in just a moment since courser's no longer in play. But there is DSI exiling enchantments, not destroying.
Nice. Because you can't destroy gods, so it has to be exiled.
You must exile them.
Yeah. That one designs itself.
Looks to have a 4th land in his hand. You see the Hollow Fountain there. The big question I think here for Joe is, all right, do I want to put the shields down? And that's a very real question at this point because we saw what Obsidian did last game, and Joe does not look comfortable doing that.
Also, if he plays his Jace down, it is likely to just be killed by Mistcutter Hydra as well. That's another factor.
But the question here is, can you afford to bob and weave around cards like this? You know, it is a disaster, I think, if Obsidian does resolve when you have a counterspell, but can you afford to wait? You know, your opponent can push cards through with Thoughtseize.
Yeah, it is riskier. It's certainly riskier, but I think that you at least have to try for 1 turn here to protect yourself.
And this is what you mentioned during game number 2. You cast this card when the opponent leaves the counter magic up.
Yeah.
In comes the Mistcutter Hydra. No fear of Celestial Flare as well because there's only 1 white mana. So a really nice turn there for Hennessey.
And this may force Joe down a bad path here of forcing him to tap out to respond on his own turn with things like Planeswalkers and Supreme Verdict, allowing Jeremy to resolve his large threats.
You saw Verdict was the draw there for Lossett. You have to imagine he has some interest firing this off. It's a pretty good spot, but can he get more value out of the card?
Well, he's already shown that he's worried about Obsidian, so tapping out here is risky if he was willing to play around it last time.
Here's 2 mana. Copy of Blind Obedience. A little late to the party here. Going to pass the turn back. Pretty good against Obsidian, though.
Yes.
You just have to beat the drain and gain portion of that card. So Lossett with 3 copies of that card in his sideboard. That's oftentimes a card you see 1 of, not 3.
Well, he's showing a lot of respect probably for Tom's win as well. A lot of haste in that deck, and just gaining a couple points of life is really good against his deck as well.
In comes Hennessey yet again. Lossett's going to go down to 12. Hennessey, maybe a Thoughtseize to clear the way? Yeah, absolutely. And Lossett looked like he was maybe trying to set up a Supreme Verdict turn. That may have gotten blown up here, but Lossett, you saw him bring a card forward. And it's a dissolve, so a timely counterspell will take care of the Thoughtseize. But more importantly, Lossett doesn't have to give away the information of what's in his hand.
I would still be surprised if Jeremy added anything else to his board at this point that would get swept up by a Supreme Verdict, though.
Lossett leaves that top card on top of his deck. We'll see if Hennessey does want to add anything, and he will. It's just a Sylvan Caryatid. So, and a land here as well, so not adding a lot.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't count. Jeremy has all the mana he needs to function here, so this is fine.
Though if I am Lossett, I think I'm very interested in casting a Supreme Verdict now.
Doesn't feel like it's getting all that much better.
Another 4-shot from that Mistcutter Hydra. I don't think it's something I would be terribly interested in if I'm in his spot. Yeah, I probably have to put the shields down on Syncopate, which is a little bit unfair, but you can't have everything.
No.
Here comes the Godless Shrine. Lossett's going to take 2. He's going to go down to 10. And looks like we're probably going to see Joe tap some mana in his main phase here. It looks like it is time to cast that Supreme Verdict. So, going to get these 3 creatures off the table. The most important of them is the Mistcutter Hydra. Hennessey sitting at a healthy 21. Lossett could have extorted if he wanted to, but you know, if you're Hennessey and you see your opponent cast a verdict and not extort, you have to imagine, all right, there's a counterspell.
Yeah, I think that Joe just wanted to leave up a Syncopate for 1 here, and he's getting paid off. Well,
so here's the issue here is that Obsidian actually cannot be cast, so we're probably going to have to unwind this game state in just a moment here. And due to the necessary mana, you see there's only 1 white mana there, and that's part of the reason I think that Lossett, of course, tapped. You know, he left the Hollow Fountain play untapped.
Yeah.
Of course, so he could Syncopate for 1. And you saw Hennessey draw Obsidian for the turn, but he can't cast it with only 1 white mana.
Well, it's not necessarily just Obsidian, too. I mean, there's a lot of 5 and 6 mana spells he's playing around in that spot.
So we will probably have to call a judge here, or the table spotter you see there acting as a judge in this situation may have to unwind the game, but we will get things figured out here.
It's a weird thing because if you're in Joe's seat, you're actually thinking, no, I want him to cast it. I want to syncopate it this turn because I may not be able to syncopate it later.
Yep. I think it would be best for me if I could syncopate this card.
Yeah.
But that is not the case. We will get a ruling for you guys here exactly on what the ruling is going to be. It looks like both players are going to let this go, so it looks like the ruling here is that the revealing of syncopate means that we've moved too far.
It's just too much information.
And so now this is a Jace with an extort trigger. So in that situation, because both players, basically what happens is Obsidian gets cast, syncopate is cast right away. We've gone too far in the game to unwind the game state, and giving away the information of the syncopate also is going way too far at that point.
Right.
See the cards that are revealed here for Lossett: a Mutavault, a Dissolve, and a Deicide.
This feels like Dissolve verse.
And you nailed it. Counterspell verse will be the pile here from Hennessey. And Lossett, with only one card left in the grip, has to decide if he wants the Mutavault and Deicide. He's taking a look at Celestial Flare, or does he want the Counterspell? Tough decision here. Joe's hand not very good.
Jeremy's mana base is pretty stretched. We got a demonstration of that last turn. 6 basic lands and 2 Mutavaults.
Lossett going to play a Mutavault, pass that turn back over to Hennessey. Hennessey going to take a draw here. It's a copy of Temple of Plenty. So that's going to come into play. Time for him to scry. That top card will go to the bottom. Take a draw here. Will Lossett's copy of Archangel of Thune. See if he wants to take down with Jace here.
I was going to say last turn that I felt Jeremy needed to Hero's Downfall this Jace away. Because how much better is this Hero's Downfall getting? It may have just gotten significantly better.
I agree.
There are 5 additional turns afterwards.
If I'm Joe in this situation as well, I think I have a high interest in just taking down Jason, trying to find a Rev. Rev will bridge the gap, get me further in this game, exactly where I want to be.
It's definitely the easier way to win. Trying to win with your creatures against a deck like Junk Midrange is much more challenging.
Looks like he's going to cash in the J, so a couple cards coming here: Detention Sphere, a Supreme Verdict, and a Plains. Not a bad reveal there.
And Jeremy with Elspeth in hand, and that's why you see him split like this. Detention Sphere is the most meaningful card.
Detention Sphere is the card that's going to go to the grip. Verdict and land will go to the bottom. See if Lossett wants to cast that Archangel just yet. See him separating a little bit of mana, so it looks like the answer is yes. So here comes Archangel of Thune, a card coming in from Lossett's sideboard, and he will extort. Of course, Archangel will not trigger because it's not in play just yet. But Lossett will go up to 11. And simply pass the turn back over to Hennessey. He's going to untap, take a draw. And we'll see what Jeremy can put together on this turn. I believe he has an Elspeth in the hand, but Elspeth just okay in the situation, not great.
He had a Hero's Downfall. He elected not to cast at the end of the turn, and now deploying the Elspeth is much more challenging.
Yeah. Well, see, maybe a little afraid of Dispel in this situation. Does he want to go with the removal spell, or is it time to play the very expensive Planeswalker? It looks like it's going to be time to play the removal spell. So going after the Archangel will get the job done there.
And Jeremy may now have missed his window to resolve Elspeth for the remainder of the game.
Island going to come and play here for Lossett. See if he has any interest in maybe firing up some Mutavaults in this situation.
Not a lot else to do.
Yeah. And he's going to go reaching for that creature land in for 4. Hennessey's going to go down to 15. Lossett's hand, again, pretty weak here. You see the Sphere, the Deicide there as well. Reactive, but Elspeth can get some value in the meantime.
And very susceptible to Obsidian.
Yeah. Another copy of Hero's Downfall over there for Hennessey. Looks like maybe a Scavenging Ooze is the last card here, as we're under 10 minutes in the round. We'll see what Jeremy has any interest in casting this turn. We saw him in the first game try to play around a counterspell when he had Blood Baron in his hand. But he's not going to try to here. Elspeth Sun's Champion will be placed on the stack. Joe looking at the Celestial Flare, a Deicide and Intention Sphere, knowing that he does have to let that resolve, but he does have an answer to the card.
Yeah. And these tokens are going to be coming into play tap too, so he can threaten with Mutavaults for a bit too.
Blind Obedience will ensure that those do come into play tapped here. So Lossett gonna try to chip away here with Mutavaults and Blind Obedience triggers to get the job done. An unorthodox way of getting it done with blue-white, but we've seen it before.
It's a tougher way to do it. I'm sure Joe would like the easy win, which is just draw Revelation here and win, but hasn't found one yet, and so has to do it the hard way.
Could very easily see this turn here for Lossett be fire up 2 Mutavaults, get you for 4, put you down to 15, play a Deicier with an Extort trigger to take care of that Elspeth. Wouldn't be a bad turn at all.
No. But Joe is a little light on resources. I'm sure he would like to, I believe there's a Jace in hand. I'm sure he would be thrilled to try to spend some time finding some more powerful stuff because he is a little susceptible to the top of Jeremy's deck right now. Does not have the game locked up by any stretch.
No, not at all. The outcome of this game is still very much in question. You can see Lossett a little unsure of himself. So he looks like he is going to fire up these Mutavaults. He's going to come after Jace. Excuse me, he's going to come after Elspeth. So that's going to go down to 1. I mentioned Jace because I think he's going to cast that card.
I think Joe might be trying to set up a turn here where he can Detention Sphere the tokens and then use the Mutavault to finish off Elspeth. To go back to a sequence that occurred in the first game with Advent of the Worm, Joe wants to use these Detention Spheres taking care of tokens as much as possible so they don't get unlocked in the event that Jeremy finds something like Abrupt Decay.
So Jace is going to take up at 5. Going to do a nice job of blanking these tokens. Hennessey going to go reaching for some mana here. I'm not sure if he drew an Obes that or not. This is going to be 3 mana. This is a Sin Collector. Okay. Oddly enough, not a bad card, but not taking the card that's most important here, which is the Detention Sphere.
Yeah, no Haymakers in Joe's hand here. The Celestial Flare and the Deicide are both basically blank cards right now. So Sin Collector, usually very good against blue-white. This is one of those spots where it's not doing very much.
So there goes the Flare.
I think Jeremy needs to take care of this Jace if he's got Hero's Downfall in hand.
Can't let that stick around any longer.
If Joe finds Sphinx's Revelation, the game probably ends. So you just can't give him that many looks at it.
You see 3 mana being tapped, and there is your Hero's Downfall to get Jace off of the table. So Jace just buying a little bit of time here against these tokens. Elspeth's going to take up to 2, but the play that Joe was setting up looks like it's going to work out for him.
Yeah, it's still fine.
Lossett with a Temple of Light. We're going to take a look at the top card. That one stayed on top pretty quick.
I believe it was an Archangel. I believe that it was William Jensen once who mentioned to me that if you have Blind Obedience plus Archangel, you cannot lose the game.
Yeah, you win the game.
You win the game.
That's what happens. A Detention Sphere going to come into play here with a little Extort trigger. Lossett going to gain 1. Hennessey going to lose 1. It's time to take care of these tokens, of course. Get these things out of the way. And what this will allow Lossett to do is fire up a Mutavault. Come in here. Finish off Elspeth. Also deal 2 damage to the opponent as well. So there goes Elspeth. 2 damage from Hennessey's life total as well. And a pretty good turn here.
You got the feeling that Joe needs to just avoid one more draw from Jeremy here.
Seven Caryatid does come in. Sin Collector is going to come in as well. And of course, Caryatid will come into play tap because of Blind Obedience, so we will get that fixed for you guys. See Lossett point that out.
I believe it's combo time.
You win the game. Presumably.
Yeah.
This is an Archangel with an Extort trigger. Of course, Archangel isn't in play yet, so the fun does not begin right away, but soon, if things go appropriately for Lossett. This is going to fire with Mutavaults as well. Going to put Hennessey down to 10.
Yeah, Extort's a trigger when you cast the spell, not when the spell resolves. So Archangel's still in the stack when that's resolving.
You see an Underworld Connections there from Hennessey. The big thing here for Jeremy is no removal spell. He's got to get that Archangel off the board.
The problem is that I believe that Joe still has that Deicide left over.
He does.
Jeremy took Celestial Flare. And it's really rough to cast any spell that allows Joe to cast anything because he gets to activate his Mutavaults. use a removal spell on it, trigger extort, pump everything before combat.
Looks like a Mistcutter Hydra was potentially the draw there. Don't have a great look at it. Maybe an Archangel thing over there for Hennessey as well. Either way, it does not look like a spell that he's going to be casting. Just going to play an Overgrown Tomb tapped and pass the turn back. Looks like Archangel will reign supreme on this board. Lossett did draw a spell for the turn, it looks like, but we know he has a Deicide hanging out. And so now he can really turn up the heat.
Yeah, this is the you win the game turn right here.
Mutavaults are going to go active. They're ready to come into the red zone. And in they will go. Blocks looking rather attractive at this point here, but Joe's going to make them look a lot uglier in just a second. It is time for a Deicide on that Underworld Connections. We'll get a trigger here from the Blind Obedience to the Extort, which of course will allow a trigger from the Archangel. Everybody's going to get a little bigger and outclass those creatures.
Whoa! Whoa!
It's a surprise.
Yeah, so many combos.
It is a trap. So once damage is dealt, of course, Archangel will gain some life. That'll trigger everything again. Everything will grow yet again. And those creatures there on Hennessy's side of the table will bite the dust. So you can see the power of Archangel if it lives.
Yeah, and Jeremy does not have a lot of defense against it post-board.
Mutavault's becoming 4/4s at this point. Hennessey going to go down to 3. And I think Jeremy's going to get to see one more draw step yet again, much like game number 1. Just overwhelmed. Corsair of Crufix the draw. And that is not going to be enough, and I think that player here, he realizes it.
Yeah, just not a lot to be done in this spot. He just kind of got, I think, in the matchup, just overwhelmed by the fact that Joe's cards just always kind of work, and Jeremy's require a lot more setup.
Blind Obedience, of course, going to tap the Archangel. It does come into play there for Hennessey. Joe will untap. He'll take a draw really quickly, fire up some Mutavaults, come to the red zone for the W. And that is going to do it. Joe Lossett is going to win this match over Jeremy Hennessey, number 3 on our Season 3 leaderboard, looking to catch up a little bit behind Alex Bertoncini, work his way towards that Players' Championship invite. 1-0 here with Blue-White Control.
2 big weekends coming up here for Joe. Assuming that he's going to Portland, which I would guess. Joe needs to do well in this weekend and Portland, because unless he's willing to travel a lot for the Open Series in Season 3, which maybe he is. I know that he's got friends and family kind of scattered throughout the areas. He's done a little road tripping before. There's a lot of pressure on these 2 tournaments for him to extend his lead over Alex, or try to go past Alex Bertoncini and a couple other people you see on the board there.
Yeah, I mean, the chase is really on right here from the get-go. That's actually what makes it pretty fun. Is that right away we're going to have players really running around for points. And, you know, this season, before you know it, and we know how these things work, we're going to be at the Invitational in Somerset before we even can imagine.
Yeah, it's August 21st.
Yeah, back end of August.
Yeah.
So before you know it, we're going to be there. Players are going to be vying for the spot. So the thing to keep in mind there is there's not really a lot of time.
No.
Where it felt like there was more times for other seasons, there's not a lot of time here. You really got to make a decision and have good tournaments right away. I think, much like we saw in season number 2, you know, Lossett got second place in Dallas and put together a couple finishes where, you know, if he has the good finishes early, that will influence his behavior, if he wants to travel or not, and then we'll end up seeing what happens here.